Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a magnifying glass to something most of us experience literally every single day, but we kind of just ignore it. We are specifically looking at the hidden mechanics inside modern vehicles, like the Kia Soul. You know the drill. If you drive a modern car, you are intimately familiar with that moment. You pull up to a red light, and suddenly, total silence. Your engine just dies. It's a feature that sparks so much debate, confusion, and honestly, a lot of driver anxiety. So let's figure out what's really happening under the hood and finally demystify your car's auto-stop system.
Okay, let's dive into this. The burning question on everyone's mind is, are you ruining your car by turning off auto stop? I know so many drivers out there who feel this massive spike of anxiety every time they reach for that override button on the dashboard. You're sitting at a busy intersection, you feel that terrible mechanical lag when you try to accelerate, and you think, man, I have to turn this off so I don't get rear-ended. But then that nagging little voice creeps in, right? Does bypassing the system destroy your transmission? Does it somehow harm the engine? Well, let's definitively answer that by looking at what the system actually is. So Kia calls their Auto Stop Start system ISG, which stands for Idle Stop and Go. But here is the absolute kicker. ISG is driven entirely by fuel efficiency and federal emissions targets. That's it. It was absolutely not designed to save your transmission or improve the mechanical health of your engine. When your engine shuts off at that red light, it's purely a mathematical maneuver designed by engineers to meet strict corporate average fuel economy standards. To really understand why car manufacturers care so incredibly much about this, just look at this number, 0.2 to 0.3. What does that mean? That represents the gallons of fuel per hour that a standard 2.0-liter four-cylinder engine, just like the one you'd find in a Kia Soul, burns while doing absolutely nothing. When you are just sitting there completely idle at a red light, your engine is still sipping between 0.2 and 0.3 of a gallon of fuel every single hour. Engineers call this parasitic fuel burn, and honestly, from a pure efficiency standpoint, it is a massive waste of resources. But by completely shutting the engine off during a typical 60-second red light, the car achieves this perfect state of efficiency. Zero fuel burned, zero carbon emitted. Now, I know what you're thinking. A single minute at a red light doesn't seem like a big deal for you as an individual driver, but when you multiply 60 seconds of zero fuel burn by millions of vehicles on the road every single day, the math becomes totally staggering. It dramatically reduces overall parasitic fuel drain and drastically cuts down daily tailpipe emissions. And that is exactly how automakers satisfy those rigid federal targets. Section 1, the Hidden Transmission Challenge. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the massive, behind-the-scenes mechanical problem this fuel-saving feature actually creates. Inside your transmission, there's a mechanical oil pump that generates the hydraulic fluid pressure you need to keep internal clutches engaged and pulleys clamped super tight against the belt. And that pump is bolted directly to the engine. So when the engine is running, the pump spins, and boom, you have great hydraulic pressure. But the second the engine shuts off at a red light, that mechanical pump stops dead. Hydraulic pressure instantly drops to zero. Without that pressure, all those internal transmission clutches just completely relax. If you would have just hit the gas in this state, the engine would fire up and you get this violent, incredibly dangerous jerk as the transmission desperately tried to slam everything back together from zero pressure. Section 2, Engineering the Seamless Restart.
So obviously, a violent jerk every time a light turns green is completely unacceptable. Transmission engineers had to perform some absolute engineering gymnastics to make sure that start-stop transition feels totally seamless. Solution 1 for this dropping pressure problem is an auxiliary electric oil pump. A lot of modern ISG systems use this tiny secondary electric fluid pump that lives right inside the transmission. The exact millisecond your engine shuts off and the main mechanical pump dies, this little electric hero kicks on. It maintains a baseline hydraulic pressure of roughly 50 to 100 psi. That is just enough pressure to keep the transmission fluid primed and those internal clutches gently staged and ready for action so they don't just completely let go.
If they don't use an electric pump, they go with solution 2, accumulators. And this is brilliant because it perfectly illustrates the concept of a hydraulic spring. Think of an accumulator as a highly pressurized little canister. Right before your engine dies at the red light, this canister traps a small amount of really high-pressure transmission fluid. The very instant your engine restarts, the accumulator acts exactly like a compressed spring, instantly releasing that trapped pressurized fluid back into the system. This locks the transmission belt down tightly before it even has a fraction of a second to slip, bridging the gap until the main engine pump gets back up to speed. Section 3. The Real Cost of Hesitation. Okay, so mechanically, the car is pulling off this highly sophisticated dance to protect itself. But what about the human element here? What about that terrifying anxiety you feel at a dangerous intersection when you just need to accelerate quickly? Well, that hesitation isn't just in your head. It is a measurable physical reality. When you let your foot off the brake pedal, the car has to execute 4 very distinct steps before you actually move. Step 1, it electronically signals the starter. Step 2, the starter must physically crank the engine. Step 3, the engine achieves stable combustion. And finally, Step 4, the transmission stabilizes its hydraulic pressure to clamp the internal belt and clutches. Even working at absolute lightning speed, this physical process takes between 0.5 and 1 full second. And let's be real, in a high-stakes traffic scenario, a 1-second delay feels like an absolute eternity. So the absolutely crucial point here is understanding what actually happens when you decide you've had enough of that delay and you reach over to press the ISG off button on your dash. You might worry you're forcing the car to do something stressful, right? But look at the internal software logic that actually occurs. By pressing that button, you are simply telling the engine control module, for this trip, do not look at the vehicle speed or brake pressure sensors to initiate an auto stop. That is literally it. You aren't physically blocking some complex mechanical process. You are just temporarily changing a single line of software code.
And the result of changing that code? It should provide you with immense relief. By hitting ISG off, you are simply reverting to 50 years of reliable, standard operation. You're just letting the engine idle normally at a red light, exactly like every standard, dependable car built over the last half-century. It is not harmful in the slightest. Your car is perfectly designed to just sit there and idle.
Actually, scratch that. You could easily argue you are doing your car a mechanical favor by letting it idle. Let's break down the components you're saving by turning ISG off. First up, the starter motor. Sure, modern starters are beefed up, but turning the system off means your starter fires exactly once when you leave your driveway, instead of, 20 times during the busy commute. Second, the battery. Without the engine constantly shutting off, your alternator consistently supplies power, rather than forcing your battery to drain while running your AC and the radio at every red light. And finally, the engine mounts. Every time that 4-cylinder engine fires back up to life, it shudders. Fewer restarts mean far less vibration traveling through and wearing out those rubber engine mounts. So, if prioritizing your intersection safety actually reduces wear and tear on all these crucial parts, what's the catch? Well, the only penalty is a tiny, microscopic fraction of a gallon of fuel. That is the absolute only downside. If you prioritize your safety and predictability at a stop sign, you are going to experience a tiny drop in your fuel economy during those extended idling periods. For most of us, trading a few drops of gas for peace of mind is a pretty easy bargain to strike, wouldn't you say? Which brings us to our final thought for today. Because of those emissions regulations we talked about, the car manufacturers are legally mandated to turn this system back on every single time you cycle the ignition key. They literally don't have a choice, but you do. Knowing that hitting the override button totally protects your peace of mind without harming your transmission one bit, since emissions laws turn it back on every drive, will pressing ISG off become part of your new daily pre-flight checklist? I really hope this explainer has empowered you with the knowledge to push that button with total confidence. Thank you so much for learning with me today, and hey, keep asking those great questions about the machines that move us.